This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Hello and welcome to The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand. I'm Joe Hildebrand, but that's not important right now. What's important is who's going to win the US presidential election. The vote is just 2 weeks away, and I've got someone on the show right here, right now, who reckons he knows the answer. He is going to call it, and this is a political guru who got the 2016 result right when everybody else got it wrong. And you might be surprised who he's picking. Plus, the PM's house on a hill, the cliff-top mansion that cost $4.3 million, and the PM just bought it in the middle of a housing crisis. It's unbelievable, isn't it? Yes, it is. That's why I'm choosing just not to believe it. Didn't happen. As far as I'm concerned, there's no way that Albo, who I know and love and is a smart and sensible and decent guy, would ever be that silly or stupid. So clearly it was just a bad dream. Okay, wake up now. See? Never happened. Don't you feel better now? I know everyone in the Labor Party does. Plus, speaking of the Labor Party, how are they going to go to the next election doing a deal with the Greens when the Greens have been infiltrated by a bunch of terrorist apologists? Well, they're not. I've got the amazing secret solution that it looks like Labor will turn to, and you heard it all here first on The Real Story. We picked this weeks ago. All that and much, much more coming up. So the first thing I want to talk about is this revelation after revelation after revelation in every masthead news organisation, from The Australian to the ABC. And you know, when the ABC is coming after the Greens, they must have done something pretty bad. About all these, what you might call terrorist adjacent candidates who seem to be popping their head up for the party. These are candidates who have been selected to run for the Greens in local government elections, where they seem to have a pretty strong focus on foreign policy. I'm not sure if they're at the right tier of government for that. But also senators in the actual Australian Parliament who are refusing to condemn even the most openly vile, evil acts of terror committed by the most vile and evil organisations. Now, I just want to give you a couple of examples, and I don't want to name any of these people. A lot of them are young, they've done dumb stuff, and I did plenty of dumb stuff when I was young as well. In fact, I actually performed for a Greens fundraiser when I was at uni. I was an unreconstructed student socialist, and I was the lead singer of a band called Lukewarm and the Tepids. Anyway, like I said, we've all done stuff. So there's one ACT Greens candidate. So this is a candidate for the ACT Legislative Assembly. So it's kind of a state, territory government, kind of more like a local government, but whatever. And he's written on Twitter, or X as it's now known, quote, "Remove Hezbollah from the list of terrorist organisations, ? You're hearing it more and more." I'm not sure what circles this guy's moving in, because I'm not hearing that. It's like, oh yeah, I was just having dinner last night and someone said, you know what we should do? Remove Hezbollah from the list of terrorist organisations. Oh, g'day, Joe. How you going? Oh, g'day, Bob. How lovely days. It sure is. Hey, I was thinking, you know what we should do? Remove Hezbollah from the list of terrorist organisations. No one is hearing that except you. Anyway, see how he goes. There was another ACT Greens candidate, and again, I just do not know where they get these people. Well, actually, I do know it's Australian National University. But point being, this person wrote a blog post under a false name, and this was found out by the ABC, right? This is the ABC going after the Greens, which is kind of like, well, it's kind of like the ALP tearing itself apart, which it does every other day. But take my point. This is not a right-wing conspiracy here. So this candidate has written, and she's very young, and, you know, hopefully she'll grow out of it. She's written a blog post titled "On Martyrdom." I mean, again, that's what I do. After I've said goodbye to Bob and we've both agreed that Hezbollah should be removed from the list of terror organisations, I go home to write a blog post on martyrdom under a false name. And in this blog post, she's compared Osama bin Laden to Jesus. No, not some South American guy, like the Jesus Christ, Son of God. And she's put him in the same category as Osama bin Laden. So she's posted this, quote, "I daydream about dying brutally for my country, my family, my lovers." Well, I don't know if they'd allow that in the sort of culture that Osama bin Laden would endorse, quite frankly. Anyway, and it goes on to say, I've gone on to idolise several other martyrs, Bhagat Singh, Hussain ibn Ali, Guru Tegh Bahadur, Che Guevara, oh, hello, Jesus Christ, Balachandran Prabhakaran, Joan of Arc, Osama bin Laden, etc. That is quite the list. You know how they say, if you could just, invite, 6 people to a dinner party, who would you choose? That's a conversation starter. And you know how that conversation would start. You know what? I think we should remove Hezbollah from the list of terrorist organisations. That's where you'd actually hear. That's where you would hear that more and more at that dinner party. Anyway, now this was claimed by the Greens and the candidate or whatever to have just been a creative writing exercise. Right? Creative writing exercise. Never mind the fact that this is a finance student. So it was just a misunderstanding. It was a creative writing exercise that this candidate has just decided to do under a false name for no apparent reason. Except when the ABC started asking questions about this creative writing exercise got even more creative because someone, possibly the creative writer, went back to the blog and changed it. And so instead of saying Che Guevara, Jesus Christ, Balachandran Prabhakaran, Joan of Arc, Osama bin Laden, etc., they've taken out the name Balachandran Prabhakaran, which raises more questions than it answers. I don't know why. Perhaps that was one martyr they didn't want in there. And they've changed etc. to laugh my ass off. LMAO. I had to get a millennial to translate that for me, but that's what it stands for, laugh my ass off. So she's gone back and made it look like a joke after being called by the ABC and then said, oh, yes, it was just a joke. Because, look, see, it says LMAO. Still not sure what the punchline is. The punchline. And Osama bin Laden. Dun, dun. Thank you very much. I'll be here all week. Try the veal. Anywho, but that might just be something that happens in the ACT. Just the ACT Legislative Assembly Greens, the ones who are actually in a coalition government with the Labor Party. I'm so sorry about that. I can't control what happens in the Canberra bubble. But that's just them, right? It's not like anyone else in the Greens is crazy. Oh, were it so. Because another Greens candidate, this time running for Bayside Council in Sydney, also seems a bit confused about what constitutes a terrorist organisation. What's the difference? And we've heard from the very same ABC that caught out the Greens, an ABC reporter being confused as to why Hezbollah flags were banned but not Israeli flags. Why were Hezbollah and Hamas terrorists and why isn't Israel a terrorist? Because aren't they terrorists too? Well, no, they're a country, you see. They're a country. They're a state. They're recognised by the United Nations, not as much as they'd like to be, sure. But they're actually a country with their own laws, democracy, parliament, standing army, etc., etc. But that seems to be a bit too confusing for some other Greens candidates. This guy, and again, I don't want to name, you can read the whole story in the Daily Telegraph, who got a anonymous tip-off from someone, could have been anyone, could have been an incredibly handsome podcaster. Who knows? He's written again on social media, out for everyone to see. Quote, IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, are total terrorists, not just partial terrorists, total terrorists. It's proven. Lots of evidence out there about it. I reckon they are worse than Hamas or ISIS. What the does ISIS have to do? They just brought in literally the worst terrorist organisation the world has ever seen. Like, this is an organisation. ISIS is an organisation most famous for being more extreme than Al-Qaeda. More extreme than the guys who flew planes into the World Trade Center. So this guy's actually outdone the Osama bin Laden chick. He's actually trumped her. Just said, hey, I'll see you, Osama bin Laden, and I'll raise you ISIS. It is just amazing. Like, even if you're going to do the whole false equivocation of, IDF are just as bad as Hamas, okay, which the Greens and all these activists do all the time. Okay, at least I've seen that before. But ISIS, like, where does that come from? Guy's been sitting about it, and he says, it's proven. Just ask the guy running for Bayside Council. But at least it's just these crazies in, the ACT Legislative Assembly or local government in Sydney who are running around saying such crazy stuff, right? No one in the actual Australian Parliament would be a terror apologist, someone who refused to condemn, say, the October 7 terror attacks, or say that clearly Hamas has to be removed from power in the Gaza Strip if we're going to have a lasting peace. No, because we have our dear friend Senator Marine Faruqi, just a poor, innocent, young foot soldier. No, she's the deputy leader of the Greens, or one of many deputy leaders. I think they have a few of them. Anyway, point being, Senator Faruqi was the guest star at an event that was held in a mosque and organised, obviously, with that mosque that openly supports Hezbollah. Who has put on its Facebook page pictures of kids wearing Hezbollah T-shirts and praised the leader of Hezbollah who was slain. She has gone to that mosque as its guest star, as its featured kind of guest star, come and see Senator Marine Faruqi, Greens deputy leader. And you know who organised that event? The guy from Bayside Council who said that the IDF was worse than ISIS. They're there together. It's amazing. And that's just in the last few weeks. That's just the ones who've come out in the last few weeks. So we all know the Greens are a bunch of crazies, right? But what does the great Australian Labor Party do about it? Because, of course, Labor relies on preferences from the Greens, from far left people who come back to the sensible centre left rather than go to the Libs or other fringe parties. Much the same way that the Libs rely on the Nationals, with whom they're in an actual formal coalition, but also preferences from One Nation that come back overwhelmingly about 60-40, 70-30 to the Libs. The Greens' preferences come about 80-20 back to the Labor Party. So the Labor Party's got all these extremists who are horrible and making their lives miserable, who are often endorsing vandalism or refusing to condemn it. They've camped outside electorate offices associated with all these crazy nutjob radicals. How do they live with them? How do they have anything to do with them politically? Or how do they at least break that intimate connection? If the Greens are kind of terrorist apologist adjacent, or indeed in some cases just terrorist apologists, how can Labor sit next to that? Well, they can't. They need a circuit breaker. They need something or someone else, a buffer between them and the Greens. And guess what? You heard it here first weeks ago on The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand, that's me, that there was another party that has broken away from the Greens, actually founded by a former Green who saw what was happening in the party and was horrified. And that party at the upcoming Queensland election has just done a deal with the Labor Party for the two of them to preference each other first before the Greens. So Labor is now preferencing that party before the Greens. So it's no longer immediately playing touchy-feely footsies with the Greens. It's got this other party from an ex-Green, which could capture a lot of the soft Green vote. And when I say Green, I really mean Green, because this is the legalised cannabis party. But these guys are now the kind of the peace-loving hippies that the Greens used to be. So, they just like a bit of a smoke or whatever. I gave all that stuff up years ago, but whatever. But the point being, they're much more reasonable on a whole bunch of other issues, and they provide an alternative to the Greens that Labor can actually live with. And the big question, of course, would this actually happen? Well, you heard the plan rolled out first here on this very podcast, and now in the Queensland election, it is actually happening. Of course, Labor is going to lose that election. They are going to be absolutely smashed, wiped the floor with them. But that alliance forms a template for the upcoming federal election, and they are in talks to do the exact same thing. And this provides Labor with this silver bullet, this get out of jail free card, where they can use another party and get their preferences, still get preferences from the Greens without it looking like they're cozying up to them, or even indeed actually cozying up to them, and have a different sort of first partner at the ballot box. So there you go. You heard it here first. It's happening in the Queensland election. And you can bet your bippy it's going to happen in the federal one too. Our guest this week is one of the great political masterminds of Australian politics, but you've never heard of him. He's a campaign guru. He's worked on every federal election campaign for the Labor Party since 2007. He's worked on every state campaign in New South Wales since 1999. And he reckons he knows who's going to win the US presidential election. So without further ado, let's bring him on. Timmy G, Tim Gleason, welcome to The Real Story. How are you?
Good. In the words of Bob Carr, good. It's a pleasure to be here, Joseph.
Good to see you. Let's firstly not talk about the house that Albo didn't buy because, of course, no Prime Minister would ever buy a multi-million-dollar mansion on a cliff top facing the water in the middle of a cost of living and housing crisis, would they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. Didn't happen. See? Exactly what I told you. But let's get straight to the big game, the big dance, the US presidential election. Now, just before we get into sort of some of the amazing little tidbits of information you've got that could unlock the secret of who's going to win, how have you seen the campaign play out so far? Obviously, as someone on the Labor side of politics, you would instinctively be a Democrat, but you actually picked Donald Trump winning in 2016 when virtually everybody else said absolutely no way.
Yeah, well, obviously, to join Young Labor, you have to be passionate. You get surgically removed from Young Labor if you don't have a passion for US politics. So obviously,
That's right.
I'm an expert from day one.
How are you seeing Kamala Harris and Donald Trump facing off at the moment? I mean, she obviously won that first and only debate between the two of them. Is that going to be enough to carry her to the White House?
No, I don't think it is, Joseph. And I think the results of that debate have sort of been a false economy. Since that debate, she hasn't done any media. And then she was forced into doing media because of the pressure that was applied to her. And they've found out pretty quickly that's not her strong suit.
It's very much a case, I think, with Kamala, and I've said it a few times, that the more people see of her, the less they seem to like her. The more she seems to come across as either grating or annoying or not across her policy details or even what her policies are. Is that part of the problem for her?
Yeah, I spoke to somebody in the Democrat Party and was the effect that being charitable, adversary interviews aren't her specialty, which I think...
Putting it nicely.
Yeah, and they said that in hindsight, they would have been better off wearing the heat for not doing those interviews rather than caving in and starting to do a realm of them. She was so poor to begin with, now she has to keep doing them to try and improve them, and to be honest, she's just not that good at them.
And they just keep getting worse and worse and worse. It's almost like a gambler trying to chase his losses. Got to make up for the last car crash interview, so I'll do another one. Then there's an even bigger car crash, and on it goes. What about you've found an incredible statistic, and this is something that none of the Americophiles, the US politics obsessives that I've spoken of, have actually picked up on yet. But there's something very particular about a couple of the swing states, including Pennsylvania, that could determine the election outcome. Tell us what that is.
Yeah, so in America, it's not, because it's a Tuesday, obviously, there's about 20 odd states where you get 2 or 3 hours off from work, paid work to vote. There's another bunch of states where you get time off work to vote, but you don't get paid. But there's another bunch of states, which include Pennsylvania, Michigan, and North Carolina, 3 of the key swing states, where you don't get any time off work. It's not mandated by the states. And you'd have to leave work and lose pay to go and vote. So unless you're really passionate about that candidate, it's really hard and onerous for you to get to the ballot box.
Wow. So, I mean, obviously people, if whoever wins Pennsylvania almost certainly wins the whole election. So even if you just look at Pennsylvania alone. So basically you have to be willing to, I think, as Neville Rand said about the Australian Labor Party, get up to your armpits in blood and shit. But you've really got to wade through the hot lava if you want to vote in Pennsylvania. So you have to be extremely committed to and passionate about your candidate. That, to me, feels like something that's going to favour Trump voters way over Harris voters. Is that right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And the last election, because of the COVID crisis, 46% of the population voted by postal vote, which is a complete outlier for US politics. I think it was 16% in 2016, it was 13% in 2012, and 11% in 2008.
Right.
So that number
So it's been creeping up and then it explodes, obviously,
Exploded.
with COVID. Joe Biden's hiding in his basement. All those pre-polls. Donald Trump wins the votes on election day, but all those pre-polls then come in favour of Biden. And Harris isn't going to get that big pre-poll.
Yeah, you'd have to ask
swing
yourself how many of those people who voted for Joe Biden, say in Pennsylvania, would have got up, left their desk or their machine, whatever it is, and went to the ballot box to vote for Joe Biden.
and lost money doing it.
Yes.
Whereas if you're voting for Donald Trump, you are going to walk through the valley of death. Yeah.
He might turn people off, but he also turns them out. If you're voting for Donald Trump, you get to the ballot box.
And I said earlier that that this is very much Kamala Harris's election to lose, it seems. I mean, I think with Donald Trump, he's kind of maxed out. I mean, after everything that Donald Trump's done or hasn't done or been through, the conviction, which was pretty trumped up and spurious, but nonetheless, if you're voting for Donald Trump and you haven't been shaken off yet, you are sticking with that guy like a barnacle to a ship. Whereas Harris had all these sort of votes that seemed to come to her as soon as she became the presumptive candidate, but they weren't sort of hard and fast votes, and they now seem to be floating away. Is that about right?
Yeah, if you're voting for Donald Trump, you're voting for Donald Trump. Like, this man's been president for 4 years. He's been in public life, if you want to call greater celebrity, for 30 years.
The celebrity
He's
apprentice.
been convicted of numerous offences.
Yeah.
Basically organised a riot to storm the Capitol, and now he's basically
He's still
away
on
with the
40%. That's right.
and basically now away with the pixies, giving 1.5 hour speeches where he talks about mosquitoes and golfing grips and chip shots. So he's not chasing any swinging voters. He has his votes, where Kamala Harris has to put together a whole bunch of swinging voters and regular Democrats to get her over the line, and new voters they are as well.
So she'll get, obviously, the anyone but Trump vote, the people who really hate Donald Trump and just will vote for his opponent, no matter who he or she is. I can't imagine she has many people who love Kamala because she's Kamala, not just because she's the Democratic nominee. I mean, I can't believe she has much of a personal following. Is that so?
No, and in her defence, she's got a somewhat difficult message to say. She's got to defend her own record, yet at the same time saying it's time for a change.
That's right.
And that's why she's been talking a lot about day one, I'm going to do this, when she's actually vice president.
No, what is that just horrendous phrase she keeps using, to become unburdened by what was, or something like that?
What can be unburdened by what has been.
No, that's her, isn't it?
That sums up. There was a great Saturday Night Live skit on the weekend, which basically was Family Feud, and she hit the buzzer and they said, name something you hide in a glove box. And her response was, the actress playing her was, I'm from a middle-class family.
That's all she's been programmed to say.
Yeah, and so when Saturday Night Live were actually really having a go at you, and you're a Democrat a few weeks out, it's also a red flag.
Right.
Yeah,
that's right. When instead of having Alec Baldwin doing Trump, they've got someone doing Kamala, you're right. So let's just get it out on the table then. Let's lay it all down. You think Donald Trump is going to win the US presidential election?
I do, because obviously it basically comes down to 7 swing states, and they're Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin.
Yep.
And so of those swing states, I think that's 93 electoral college votes.
Yep.
So basically, whoever wins those, or the majority of those, will win the election. In 2016, Trump won all of those bar Nevada, which is really tough for a Republican to win.
Yep.
And in 2020, Biden took them all back except for North Carolina. And then the results were eerily the same it was like 306 to 232. It was a similar result from 2016 to 2020, just flipped the other way. So really, if you can win those states, you'll win the election.
And 270 is obviously the magic number. You've got 538 electoral college votes, and you've got to win a majority of those. It's not exactly a popular vote. And of those swing states, I mean, obviously Donald Trump is way ahead in Georgia. Obviously still had South Carolina, and Pennsylvania is the key one. I think it's got the most electoral college votes, and it seems to be a real classic middle American battleground state. And that is where, if you want to vote for your candidate, you have to be prepared to actually take time off, lose money for that time, queue up for God knows how long on polling day. Sometimes there are waits of hours on end. And you've really got to want your guy or girl to win to do that.
You really got to line up. And the latest polling from Nate Silver, who combines all those polls and is not a Republican, has now Trump just 0.5 behind in Pennsylvania. And he's gained every week from the last 3 weeks. And the interesting thing to note also is Trump's polling vote, public opinion polls vote, is always lower than it is on election day. In 2016, he was around 43.5% in the polls on election day, and he got 46.1% of the vote. And in 2020, he was 43.5% and ended up with 46.8% of the vote. So basically, there's a couple of percent that won't admit over the phone or online they're going to vote for Donald Trump.
The famous shy Trump voter.
Yes, I'm not racist, but one of those type things. And if you take that into consideration and the way those 7 swing states are trending, where he's up in 4 or 5 already, that it's getting to a stage where it could be really, really difficult to find a way where she can come up with 270.
So Trump is actually in a stronger position now, despite everything, than he was in 2016 when he won.
Yeah, Hillary Clinton was in a lot better position now than Kamala Harris is. So, a lot better position, which should be a red flag. I'm all into red flags at the moment, Joseph.
That's right. A red flag.
After the Sydney Swans grand final, I said, in hindsight, there were red flags all over the place. So I've come on here with a mentality of just looking at red flags.
Red flags
they're
everywhere
in the Democrat campaign.
That is why you are the smartest man in Australia.
She's raised $1 billion, Kamala Harris, and yesterday on the front page of the New York Times was she needs more money. So I don't know.
Now, again, as I said before, you're one of those kind of outside-the-box thinkers who identifies stuff that a lot of people may have missed. What are your 3 or 4 hot takes on this election campaign that may have slipped under the radar for the rest of us?
The importance of primaries. There wasn't any primary in the Democrat campaign, so basically the candidate was anointed and appointed without any sort of fighting along the way, and it's come back and hurt the Democrats. So the need
she hasn't
for primaries,
been blooded.
Yes. Another one is it can't all be dessert. There's got to be some meat first before dinner. You have to do some hard interviews at the start of the campaign, not just podcasts. Apologies, Joe. Or appearances on The View or so forth. Yeah. Unless you're gone through the primaries.
Do 60 minutes, then The View, not the other way around.
Yeah, you should be doing 60 minutes in February, not in October, basically. And then you should be hitting the podcast scene with basketballers. Another one is the VP has got to bring something to the table. He or she has to compliment you. Yeah. George W. Bush had Dick Cheney, so people are a bit concerned. Is he really? Ronald Reagan losing his faculties had George Bush. Tim Walz is in now a knucklehead. He's Chuck Norris. He's missing in action at the moment.
Well, he was the great white hope. He was the one who coined the kind of, they're just weird positioning of Trump and Vance, but that's all.
But I think that's what got him the job. His one sentence saying they're just weird. You probably need more qualifications than a good one-liner.
Yep. Okay, and your last hot take, Timmy G?
Netflix, Apple TV, the rest of them, they'll be piling the documentaries, getting them ready on this campaign, which has been horrific. There'll be more finger-pointing amongst Democrats than there was by Tom Cruise in the last scene of A Few Good Men. It's going to be, as an American guy who I know spoke to me the other day. I said, how's it looking? He said, put it this way. I haven't bought any champagne for election night, just stocking up on scotch. And I think that sums it up.
That's just too perfect. Tim Gleason, political guru extraordinaire, thank you so much for joining us on The Real Story.
Absolute pleasure, Joseph. And of course, if this doesn't turn out, you've got to burn it if it doesn't work.
That's right. We'll get Netflix to make a documentary on where this podcast all went horribly wrong.
Yes. Can we record the one where she wins?
Do you want to record the alternative ending? Love your work, mate. Next up this week, I just wanted to talk about the fact that the Prime Minister did not buy a $4.3 million clifftop house in the middle of a housing crisis. Just a quick reminder that didn't happen. And here's exactly what I've got to say about that not happening. And I stand by that. And that's all we have time for this week. Thank you so much for joining us as always. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you're putting any money on Donald Trump winning the US election, please give me a 10% cut because remember, you heard it here first. If you like what you heard, leave us a review, hit the 5-star thing. That's the only button that works, by the way, just the 5-star one. Don't even bother trying any of the other ones. And you can follow me on Instagram at Joe_Hildebrand. Slide into my DMs if you want anything talked about on the show. If you've got anything you'd like discussed, any questions you want answered, you can also email us at therealstory@novapodcasts.com.au. And of course, you can read my columns in the Daily Telegraph and all News Corp mastheads around the country on every Monday and Saturday. That's all, and we'll see you next week. Take care.